Hi, my name is Tyler Womack, and I'm going to be your TA for Intro to ABA. I'm super excited to be working with everyone. It's definitely a bummer that we can't be together in person. I know discussion sections and lectures are a lot better in person, but I'm hoping that we can make this work as best as possible. Based on your votes, it seems like most of you wanted to go asynchronous. So what's going to happen each week is I will record a discussion section that you guys can watch at your own time. So let's go ahead and get started. So first, I'm just going to introduce myself. My name is Tyler, and I used to work as a special education teacher. And then I decided to go to graduate school to study school psychology. So I'm currently in the PhD program, and I am entering my third year. If you are interested at all in entering a PhD program or applying to graduate school, please feel free to shoot me an email asking any questions, or you can come during my office hours. Um, but I'm very excited about this course. I think applied behavioral analysis is really important in the education field, and it has a lot of applications. And it was especially useful to me both as a special education teacher, and now I feel like I'm able to delve into the topic more deeply in my school psychology program because we also have the BCBA track, which you'll be learning about more as we go through the course. So for the agenda for this recording, first I have a little activity for introductions, and then I have an overview of the discussion section, and then I'll go over some important terms from the week 1 lecture, and then I'll introduce an article activity that you guys can complete at your own time. So to contact me, my email address is here. It's also on the syllabus. I will be having office hours Wednesdays from 3:30 to 4:30 p.m. weekly. I can also have an additional appointment available, but make sure you email me ahead of time. Otherwise, I won't be join the Zoom link unless I know that someone's going to be coming onto the meeting. You can make an appointment with me on Friday between the time of 2 and 4 p.m. But again, please just email me in advance if you want to meet during my Friday time. For emails, I will typically respond to emails Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. And I ask that you give me a 48-hour window to respond. As a graduate student, we get a lot of emails, and we also have our own classes and assignments. So this would just be enough time for me to be able to get back to you in a timely manner. Obviously in person, it would be nice to hear all of your responses. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a discussion board post, and I would really like you to respond with your name, your major, and your year, why you're interested in this class, and what is the last show you binge watched. During the start of the quarantine, I was definitely one of those that joined the bandwagon and binge watched Tiger King, which is just this crazy show. And then I realized at the end of it that I think I actually met Joe Exotic because when he was going to different malls to do the tours of the tigers, he actually went to a mall that I used to live in, or not live in, but I used to live in Illinois. So he went to the mall that I used to live by. So that's just a fun fact about me. All right, so next let's go over how this discussion section is going to look. So I will review important information that will help you with your quizzes. So you'll be having a quiz every week, and each of these quizzes is going to be covering the content that Dr. Johnson is going over every Friday. I will also review how to complete important assignments when they come up. And then I will also go over optional activities to apply what you've learned from the previous Friday lectures. So some important tips for quizzes. Everything that you need to know for these quizzes will be on Dr. Johnson's lecture slides. So just make sure that you review the information that he's presenting beforehand. The quizzes will sometimes cover the content that's from that week, or it might include some questions from the previous week. So just make sure that you're always keeping on top of reviewing the terms. And the handouts I'm providing you with the discussion sections will be helpful for that as well. So that is my second tip is make sure that you keep a running list of all the vocabulary that he's going through, along with some definitions and examples. A huge thing about ABA is just remembering all of the different terms. That's going to be your biggest challenge for this quarter. But then once you review them, it gets a lot easier. So every week, I'm going to be providing you a handout that has terms that were important for that week. So for this week, we have less terms than you normally would. Starting next week, we're going to be having a lot of different terms to review. But just for this week, we're going to review what is behavior, what is ABA, and what is database decision making. I think it's a good idea to put both a definition, an example, and a non-example. Since most of the quizzes are multiple choice, a lot of the questions are formatted in a way where you're having to either ask what is an example of that vocabulary term, or sometimes you might have to identify a non-example of it. So this is just another way to help you prepare for those weekly quizzes. So just for today's discussion section, I'll be going over how I would fill out the handout. But then the following weeks, I'll have you guys just decide how to fill out the handout that would be most helpful for you. Okay, so going into the terms, first definition is what is behavior? So behavior is anything a person does that can be observed. It has to be done by a living organism. So for example, a person can have a behavior, but an object cannot. Like my water bottle, for example, can't have a behavior. There must be an interaction between the organism and the environment, so both can change. So for example, behavior can't just be a feeling. It has to be something that's observable. A lot of times we can't really guess what someone's feeling just by looking at them, whereas by looking at them, we can see behaviors. So for example, Joe felt angry. We wouldn't necessarily know that, but if we were able to see that Joe starts hitting the wall, then that's the behavior, is him hitting the wall. There also must be a displacement in space through time. So what that means is that behavior cannot be static. It has to involve some kind of movement. And the way to test that is can the dead person do it? So if a dead person can do it, then you know it's not a behavior. So 3 important principles that Dr. Johnson will go over as well is for that behavior serves a purpose, behavior is learned, and behavior is lawful. So behavior serves a purpose. So behavior is done for a reason. If an individual doesn't have a reason to perform this behavior, they're unlikely to do it consistently. So an example of a behavior is if Tony screams to get his mom's attention and then she answers him, it's more likely that he'll use screaming as a way to gain attention. So that would be the purpose of the behavior, to gain his mom's attention. Behavior is also learned. So usually behaviors are learned from experiences. So for example, in that scenario I just gave, if Tony's mom responds when he screams, then he's learning that he can gain attention in that way. So he can gain attention by screaming. Whereas if she had ignored him, then maybe he would have realized he needs to get attention in a different way. So behavior is also lawful. So usually a behavior follows some kind of order. Usually something happens before, during, and after a behavior. So for example, Sally is reading, that's the behavior. But what happened before then was the teacher put a handout on Sally's desk. Sally followed the directions, and then she started to read the handout. So that is an order to why the behavior first occurred. And you're going to be learning that in a lot more detail as the quarter goes on. So let's go through some examples and non-examples of behavior. So for example, these are all examples of behavior, so they're observable. So Sarah said thank you to her teacher. Corey petted his dog. Lucy smiled at her friend. So those are all behaviors that we can actually see in real life. Things that would not be behaviors, Bobby felt angry. We can't necessarily observe emotion. We can observe emotion through people's actions, but we can't get inside people's heads and actually know what they're feeling. Anna is covered in Play-Doh. That wouldn't be a behavior because we didn't see how she's covered in Play-Doh. Mary got wet in the snowstorms. For that, that's something that happened to her rather than her doing an action. So these are all good examples, these are all non-examples of behavior. So now going back to that handout that's on iLearn. So this is an example of how I would fill it out. So I have my vocabulary term, behavior. My definition: anything a person does that can be observed. Behavior is purposeful, learned, and lawful. An example I chose was Sarah said thank you to her teacher. A non-example is Bobby felt angry. So this is how you can fill out the handout to help you remember some of the terms. Okay, so the next term we're going to go over is what is ABA? So applied behavioral analysis is a theoretical framework that makes specific assumptions about why behavior happens. And so why do we use ABA? So one reason that ABA is so important is it keeps especially educators accountable. So they have to use data in order to make a hypothesis about a behavior. And it's based on what's called so data-based decision making. So what that means is that we can't just guess why someone's doing a behavior without collecting data and trying to really understand the problem. And then once we make that hypothesis, we then try to incorporate different interventions to change the environment. So that would be this doable section. So it's doable because we're making changes to the environment to help make it more likely that the behavior can be changed in a positive way. And then optimistic, because in ABA, we believe that behavior is learned and therefore is able to be unlearned or can be changed. So some common myths about ABA. Myth one, ABA is a treatment specifically for autism. While ABA is used for students with autism, ABA is actually used for people all around the world to help all kinds of people overcome different types of social and behavioral problems. You'll see this used in counseling. You can see this with a student who is not in special education, but maybe just needs extra behavior support. So you can see ABA in a lot of different settings, so it's not used specifically for one group of people. Another myth is that ABA does not teach a child how or why to do something, only to behave in a certain way. So a good ABA program that is really based in ABA theory also needs to teach accordingly to the needs of the individual. So this can include teaching them if they need, like, for example, complex language, better social interactions, better problem solving, flexible thinking, and theory of mind. So those are all examples of things that may be incorporated if that's what the individual needs. Another myth is that ABA is an experimental treatment and not scientifically based. The truth is that ABA is a program that has some of the most scientific positive data and support for its principles. Dr. Johnson will likely be sharing some articles showing some of the effectiveness of ABA treatments, but there is a lot of scientific and evidence base for the use of ABA. So then back to the handout. So here's another example of how I would fill out my handout based on that previous slide. So ABA, the definition is a theoretical framework that makes specific assumptions about why behavior happens. My example is using data to make a hypothesis about an individual's behavior. And a non-example would be a treatment only for kids that have ADHD, or sorry, ASD. Sorry, there was a typo there. All right, so our final term for today, data-based decision-making. So data-based decision-making can happen in a variety of environments, but I'm going to talk about schools specifically. So the definition of data-based decision-making is an educator's ongoing process of collecting and analyzing different types of data, including demographic, student achievement tests, behavioral observations, staff and parent interviews, etc. So the reason why data-based decision-making is so important in ABA is because we need to know the why and the how before we can actually make a plan to help a student. So for example, a behavior analyst can conduct a formal behavior observation to identify a student's behavior, including what happens before and after the behavior. A non-example would be a school purchasing a new curriculum without looking at the research base for that curriculum or looking at prior student achievement data to determine if that curriculum would best suit the student population's needs. So in this diagram, what it's showing is that before we can jump from problem to action planning, we need to have some steps. So in between, we need to have problem solving, So that includes the data collection phase and figuring out what would be the best way to address the issue. And then you would need a solution. So after collecting the data, you determine what is the best intervention, and then action planning. So determining how is this intervention going to be carried out, by whom, etc. So as we go through the quarter, you're going to be given more examples of how database decision making actually looks in practice with ABA. So back to the handout. So the vocabulary was database decision making. So for my definition, I put educators' ongoing process of collecting and analyzing different types of data. For my example, I put different types of data that can be collected. And then non-example, essentially school personnel making a decision without looking at data. So this is the type of example I put for mine. So next, I'm going to talk about the activity that you can complete. And the questions that go along with this activity is also included in the handout I'm posting on iLearn. So the activity that you're going to do is you're going to read this short New York Times article entitled School Kids in Handcuffs. And then once you finish reading this article, you're going to answer these questions. So number one, what are your initial reactions after reading this article? What is an alternate solution to dealing with problem behaviors in the classroom? Number two, what are the assumptions that the commenters are making about the cause of the students' behavior problems? What are the implications of those assumptions? So just around a paragraph each for these, and then you can use examples from the article to support your answers. So if you have any questions, again, please feel free to email me. You can also stop by my office hours, which again are on Wednesdays from 3:30 to 4:30. And then if you cannot make that time, you can email me and meet me during the Friday time. But I'm looking forward to working with all of you, and I'm really excited that you're taking this course. I think ABA is such a great practice, especially for the education field. And I think we're going to have a lot of fun learning this quarter.